Welcome back to Dark Sleep Radio. Tonight, I'm sharing another real-life encounter from beyond our world. Before we start, drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from. Get comfortable, settle in, and let's begin. The night was strange from the start. Late November, about 3 years back, with temperatures unusually warm for that time of year, mid-60s and completely still. Heavy fog blanketed the shipping yard just outside Port UNM, California, creating an eerie atmosphere that muffled sound and reduced visibility to almost nothing. I was working the overnight security shift at a coastal shipping yard, a job that mostly involved walking perimeters and checking warehouse locks. My shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and after midnight, I was typically alone. Gus, the other guard, usually clocked out around 11:30, leaving me with nothing but loading cranes and empty asphalt. This particular night, the fog was so thick, it felt like wet cotton, hanging low and obscuring everything beyond the fence lines. Even with floodlights blazing, I could barely see ahead. My high-powered mag light, the kind you could use to defend against wildlife, could only cut through about 30 feet of the misty darkness. Around 2:20 a.m., during my second full walk-round, I was crossing the back lot near the freight containers. My flashlight was in my left hand, radio clipped to my vest. I always keep things quiet, listening for potential intruders, even raccoons trying to sneak under the fence. That's when I heard it, a low, steady humming. Not loud, but a vibration I felt more in my chest than my ears. It reminded me of standing near a diesel engine or big transformer, except this sound was coming from directly overhead, maybe 30 or 40 feet up. I stopped and looked up, scanning through the orange-tinted fog from the yard lights. My flashlight beam swept upward, and that's when I saw it. Something just hanging in the air. Not moving. Not a plane. Not a helicopter. Just suspended, impossibly still. Fog hung thick over the yard, obscuring everything. At first, I could barely make out a dark shape, more like an absence than an actual object. But it was definitely there, hovering completely motionless above me. This wasn't a standard drone. It was massive, bigger than a bus, yet somehow suspended silently in the air. The deep, steady hum remained constant, its pitch unwavering. I stood frozen, transfixed by this impossible sight. Without thinking, I made a critical mistake. I aimed my flashlight directly at the shape. The beam cut through the mist like a knife. Instantly, everything changed. The hum vanished. The object disappeared. Not gradually, not flying away, but simply blinking out of existence, as if someone had flipped a switch. I was left staring at empty sky, my flashlight beam illuminating nothing but fog and darkness. Instinctively, I scanned the area. Nothing moved. The only sounds were distant waves and the soft buzz of yard lights. Panic rising, I grabbed my radio and clicked it twice before stammering. "Base, this is Parker. Do we have anything airborne near the south lot?" Silence answered me. There was no base, I knew that. I was alone. For the next 20 minutes, I methodically checked the perimeter. I searched for any evidence, burn marks, impact craters, anything unusual. My search revealed nothing. When I returned to my original position and shined the light upward, the sky remained empty. Around 3:10 a.m., near the old fuel shed, I felt the vibration before hearing the sound. That same deep resonance had returned. This time, the hum seemed different, positioned about 50 yards toward the water, not directly overhead. I remained motionless, hand resting on my flashlight, but not daring to aim it. I was at my usual job when it happened again. A week after the first incident, I overheard Gus talking to a day shift worker about a strange helicopter he'd seen around 4 a.m. near the rail spur. He described it as completely silent, without running lights, just hovering before vanishing behind the warehouse. I stayed quiet, stirring my coffee, not mentioning the earlier event. Months later, I was hiking the North Fork Skookamish Trail in Olympic National Forest with my Border Collie mix, OD. It was late September, cloudy and mild. We'd started early, around 7 a.m., on a trail known for its solitude. I passed one older hiker about an hour in, then it was just me and OD, moving steadily. We stopped for lunch near an old footbridge around noon and continued until 2:30 before turning back. That's when things got strange. About a mile past our lunch spot, the forest light changed. It wasn't like a cloud passing overhead. This was different. The light dimmed smoothly, as if someone had gently lowered a dimmer switch. OD stopped and looked up at me, ears forward, tail tucked slightly. Something felt off. Those 15 seconds felt familiar, reminiscent of a previous unexplained moment. I'd learned to pay attention. I continued working at that job for another 8 months after the initial incident. Nothing else unusual happened, but I started wearing a body cam clipped to my vest, always carrying extra batteries, just in case. The helicopter, the light, the silence, they remained unexplained mysteries that lingered in the back of my mind. The day was already unsettling before the shadow appeared. Silent and perfectly geometric, it drifted across the ground in front of us, a sharp triangle about 50 feet wide with blurry dark corners that seemed to melt against the dirt and leaves. When it faded at the edge of a hill, I looked up, expecting to see a plane or strange kite. Nothing, just gray sky through the treetops. OD's reaction was unusual. His bark was different, lower and more frantic than normal. He ran about 20 feet down the trail, stopped, and kept barking into the woods. When I followed, he immediately turned and ran back to me, refusing to go forward again. I kept scanning the sky, but it remained empty. The return trip felt strange. Typically, forest trails buzz with life, birds, squirrels, insects rustling. But now everything was dead silent. No wind, no movement. That kind of eerie stillness that makes you feel unwelcome. We hurried back, probably faster than was safe given the steep switchbacks. Near a moss-covered boulder, I stopped briefly. OD wouldn't sit, instead standing with his head low, eyes fixed on the ridge to our left. I saw nothing, but felt watched, that spine-tingling sensation of someone standing silently behind you. The most unsettling moment came just before the trailhead. A narrow section wound through old-growth forest, massive fir trees with almost no underbrush, allowing clear sightlines. Rounding a bend, something caught my eye about 40 yards off the trail. Initially mistaken for a tree stump, it was the wrong color, a matte black like charcoal, without texture. Shaped like a 7 feet tall wedge, it stood between two trees, too cleanly edged to be natural. OD froze, growling low in his throat. We were hiking, and I shifted slightly to get a better view. Suddenly it vanished. Not moved or ducked away, just gone. No sound, no rustling leaves, nothing. I stood frozen, trying to make sense of what happened. Walking into the trees where it had been, I searched for an explanation, maybe a shadow or light trick. But the area was empty, just pine needles and roots. The trees were spaced widely enough that something that large couldn't have hidden without me seeing it leave. We didn't waste time after that. We rushed back to the parking lot, reaching my truck around 6:15. OD jumped into the back seat, which was totally out of character. He usually sniffs around or waits for my signal. It's time. He was done. When I started the truck, my phone showed 3 missed calls from the same unfamiliar area code. No voicemails. What struck me was their timing, all within a minute of each other, between 2:44 and 2:45 p.m., right around when we saw that shadow. The drive home felt strange. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed us. Not a physical thing, just a presence. OD stared out the back window the entire time, never settling down. About 20 minutes from home, he started whining softly, something he never does in the car. Arriving home around 8, I let him into the yard. He did his business quickly and immediately returned to the door, refusing to go back outside for the rest of the night. Before bed, I checked the sky. No clouds, no aircraft, nothing unusual. Yet I kept waking up hourly, certain someone was outside, just standing, not moving. I never saw anything, though the porch light flickered once around 3 a.m. before returning to normal. A week later, I reviewed the photos from our hike. I'd taken about a dozen shots of the trail and OD near the river. They were all ordinary except one. Near the footbridge, in the top corner just above the treetops, there was a faint, triangular shape, blurred like seen through glass, perfectly formed. I don't remember taking this photo. No ground shadow, no overhead indication, but it was there. No matter how many times I looked, the image remained unchanged. The drive home from my sister's place was something I'd done hundreds of times before. Springfield to Eugene, straight down 126, usually a smooth 2-hour trip with light traffic. That Tuesday night, I'd left around 11:45 p.m. after helping her move some furniture, feeling a bit sore from wrestling with her heavy sofa. My Subaru's dash cam was running, as always. I'd installed it a year ago after someone tried to blame me for a fender bender, and now it was just habit. A cheap front-facing camera from Amazon, hardwired to turn on with the ignition and record in a continuous loop. The first hour was completely normal. I passed through Mapleton around 12:50 a.m. and then hit that dark, winding forest stretch near Nodi. It's the kind of road that gets pitch black after midnight. No streetlights, minimal shoulder, just endless trees and the occasional deer warning sign. I was cruising at 52, music playing low. Everything seemed fine. Then things got strange. Around 1:15 a.m., the radio started to static. At first, it wasn't unusual, but when my Bluetooth didn't kick in as it normally would, I knew something was off. The screen froze, showing the same song from 20 minutes earlier. No response to the power button, volume knob dead. Suddenly, everything went silent. No engine hum, no wind. The speedometer still read 52, but something felt wrong, like sliding instead of driving, as if moving without friction. The headlights dimmed, washing out the trees ahead and blurring the road's edges. High beams made no difference. Weirdly, I wasn't scared, just blank, aware something was wrong, but unable to fully process it. The whole experience felt surreal, suspended between normal and something else entirely. Now, looking at the dashcam footage, I can't figure out how it got in the frame. I got home late that night, around 2:03 a.m., after an uneventful drive from my sister's place. At first, everything seemed normal. The radio had unfrozen, music playing mid-song. Headlights looked fine. Streetlights lined the road, with a few houses showing porch lights. I chalked it up to some random technical glitch or power surge. The next morning, curiosity got the better of me. I decided to check the dash cam footage, a routine I follow to clear memory and ensure proper recording. Plugging the micro SD card into my laptop, I began reviewing the video. Initially, everything looked standard. Clear timestamp, MPS, smooth resolution. I skimmed through the first hour, noting the roads, towns, and even a deer that had crossed near Walton. Then something odd caught my attention. Between timestamps 131 and 13341, there was a gap. Not a corrupted or blank section. The file simply jumped from one clean frame to another, as if 14.5 minutes had vanished. No stuttering, no glitching, just a clean cut. I later calculated this covered about 11 miles of road, a drive typically taking 12 to 15 minutes. Thinking it might be a technical issue, I ran disk utility, reformatted the card, and tested with another video. Everything worked fine. I even tried the footage on a different computer. Same result. The gap was real. Checking the GPS overlay confirmed my suspicions. Normally, my dashcam logs coordinates every few seconds, but in this section, the data froze at 44.439 and 123.86565 near Horton Road and didn't update until 13:341, when I suddenly appeared east of NY. A heavy feeling settled in my stomach. I called my sister to confirm my departure time. She said I left just before midnight. Her kitchen clock showed 11:46 p.m. when I grabbed my keys. My car's trip log showed a 127-minute drive, 2 hours and 7 minutes. The timing seemed to work. If you ignored the missing 14 minutes of footage, radio silence, GPS freeze, and memory lapse. The only other peculiar detail was the mileage on that stretch of Route 126. The drive started just outside Hanksville, where I'd been staying in an old camper trailer about 5 miles out of town, tucked away on a dirt road that barely exists on any map. The area was silent, the kind of quiet you only find in the Utah desert, with no neighbors and no traffic. My dashcam captured something strange that night. The footage shows a clean 14-minute gap, like I'd simply blinked and skipped forward. When you look closely at the timestamps, it becomes obvious. The odometer logged only 2.2 miles between 2 points that were actually just under 11 miles apart. A few nights later, I drove the same stretch again. Same time, similar weather, maintaining around 50 miles per hour. Everything worked normally. No radio drop, no headlight dimming, no missing data. The route was nothing but forest, tall fir trees, and a 2-lane road with no shoulder. No turnouts, no cell towers, no power stations. Just emptiness. I didn't mention the missing footage for a while. When I finally told my friend Mark, a mechanic, he offered to check the car. Everything checked out. Battery fine, alternator fine, no voltage drop, no logged computer errors. I even contacted the dashcam manufacturer. They'd never heard of anything like this, especially with both GPS and video freezing simultaneously. I sent them the clip. They never responded. The map draws a straight line between the last known points, as if I'd flown over a chunk of road. I took pictures to confirm I wasn't imagining things. The odometer still shows that short segment. Now, even in broad daylight, that stretch near Horton makes my chest tighten. There's nothing unusual about the place, yet it doesn't feel like somewhere something happened. It feels like somewhere something was. I still have the footage saved on an external hard drive. I don't watch it much anymore. Nothing looks strange unless you're paying attention to the timestamps. And in my memory, nothing feels missing. Just another quiet drive on familiar roads. I was heading back from town that night after grabbing dinner and coffee. My old 03 Tacoma, pushing 200,000 miles, cruised along the narrow desert road at about 45 miles per hour. The night was clear and cool, around 50 degrees, with no wind. Miles of low scrub and open landscape stretched out around me, pitch black like driving through ink. Something caught my eye in the side mirror, a light that didn't behave like a normal vehicle headlight. It was too smooth, too steady. No bouncing, no typical road movement, just a single bluish-white beam hovering exactly 200 feet behind me, matching my every speed change perfectly. I started testing it, tapping the brakes, slowing down to 35, speeding back up to 50. The light followed precisely. No engine sounds, no variations. I turned off the dash lights to get a better view out the rear window. Still just that one unnatural white light. About a mile from my trailer, I pulled onto the shoulder and stopped. The light didn't immediately halt, but gradually coasted to a stop, maintaining the exact same distance. Dead silent, completely still. I stepped out of the truck, leaving the engine and headlights running. Walking to the back, I saw something extraordinary. No vehicle, no bike, no visible source. Just a grapefruit-sized ball of white-blue light hovering 6 feet off the ground. It didn't cast shadows or have sharp edges, just a pure, otherworldly glow suspended in midair. I'm not easily frightened, but this was different. Something was definitely not right. F-18s, carrier operations, night flights, and pitch-black storms were familiar to me. But this was different. No noise, no heat, no recognizable structure. Just there. I was in a small town called Elton's Fork, nestled in northern Pennsylvania. Around 400 people, a gas station, a diner, a feed store. Not much ever happened here. That Thursday night, just after 9:30, I had just put the kettle on and was about to do dishes when the power went out. Not a flicker or sound, just a clean snap into darkness. I raised my hand and waved at this strange presence. No reaction. When I reached for my flashlight in the truck bed, something shifted. Not quickly, but a gentle drift to the right, like it was watching me from another angle. I froze. It stopped moving. I stepped back. It remained still. Looking outside, I saw the street was dark. Porch lights across the street were out. The liquor store's flashing sign dead. Everything was black. I don't know how long I stood there, maybe a minute. Then it started moving again, but not toward me. It began to rise, smooth, straight up. No acceleration, like an elevator, impossibly climbing. Up about 50 feet, then paused. Suddenly it shot straight upward. Gone. No arc, no fade, just a vertical streak and nothing. I've spent my whole adult life around aircraft. Stealth tests, drones, experimental DARPA projects. I've seen it all. This wasn't any of that. No way to explain how something could track you, match your speed perfectly, hover silently, then vanish like a bottle rocket into space. I drove home, not looking in the mirrors. Hands on the wheel, I pulled into the trailer lot, killed the engine, locked the doors, sat on the couch in darkness for an hour. I know what people think when someone claims to see a floating light in the desert. But I wasn't drunk. I wasn't tired. I haven't seen it again, but now I take the long way through the pass. Adds 30 minutes, but feels safer somehow. The porch lights still glowed on the hilltop houses a mile up, creating a stark divide. From my doorway, I could see the edge of the outage cutting a clean line through the darkness. Something felt off. The silence was unnatural. No TV hum, no truck engines. Even the insect buzz seemed muted. I called the power company and got a pre-recorded message claiming no outages in the area. That didn't add up. Walking to the curb, I saw Main Street pitch black, with a few people on their porches looking bewildered. The air felt thick and almost motionless, like an approaching storm, except the sky was completely clear. Grabbing a flashlight and jacket, I headed to Curtis's place. A retired fire marshal in his mid-60s, he was level-headed and might have insights. He was already on his front step with a walkie-talkie, frustrated that he could only get static from the volunteer station. His scanner was dead, even with fresh batteries. Curtis mentioned his brother had just texted from Saddle Road, reporting full power and cell bars. We decided to investigate the extent of the blackout. In my truck, we drove down Meadow Line, past the post office, toward the bypass. At the Bricker Lane intersection, the dashboard lights flickered briefly. Suddenly, everything changed. Street lamps, traffic signals, even the Methodist Church's LED sign came to life. We pulled over, discussing the bizarre situation. The outage formed a perfect circular zone about a mile wide, centered directly over the town. No downed lines, no blown transformers, no storms or wind, just an inexplicable darkness. We drove the perimeter clockwise, tracking where power cut off and resumed. At the south end, we passed a man standing in his yard, half in darkness, half illuminated by his porch light. He stood motionless, staring, a silent witness to something truly strange. We'd stopped at the fire station to use their landline, which was on the edge of the power outage and still working. When we called the county office, they hadn't heard about any problem. No maintenance was scheduled, no alerts issued. They said they'd investigate and hung up. By the time we returned to Main Street, more people were outside. A couple dozen residents wandered around in jackets and slippers, phone lights casting soft glows, talking in hushed, nervous whispers. The mood wasn't panicked, just uneasy. Strange things began happening. Standing in front of the hardware store, my flashlight started to dim weirdly. It wasn't battery failure, more like some kind of interference. The light faded in and out before stabilizing. Others nearby reported the same experience. One guy showed his phone's compass app spinning wildly. A woman claimed to hear a low humming sound like a generator, but no one could locate its source. Curtis approached with an even stranger observation. His analog watch had stopped, frozen at 9:47. When he tapped it, the watch started ticking again. He mentioned it hadn't needed new batteries in years. At 10:12, every dog in the neighborhood erupted in simultaneous barking. The cacophony lasted maybe half a minute before dropping into complete silence. Not even crickets made a sound. Conversation stopped. We felt like we were waiting for something, though nothing seemed to happen. Then we noticed the cloud, except it wasn't really a cloud. More an absence, a darker shape in the sky moving slowly from west to east. You could only glimpse it through peripheral vision, a shifting blur high above, blotting out stars in its path. No sound, no wind accompanied it. A few of us followed on foot toward the dark zone's edge, but once we crossed into the powered area, it vanished. The sky looked completely normal. When I stepped back over that invisible line, my flashlight dimmed again. This wasn't imagination. The strange phenomenon passed from view around 10:30. The dogs barked once more, briefly, then fell silent. Nobody knew what to make of it. The night felt unnaturally quiet. At exactly 11:02, lights blazed on simultaneously. Phones pinged, porch lights flickered to life, and everything returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. We'd driven up to Eagle Ridge late on a Saturday night, just the four of us, me, Jess, Sam, and Nate, looking to escape the city for a bit. About an hour out on the edge of a state park, it was a spot where stars really shine because of barely any light pollution. We'd been talking about this trip for weeks. Our plan was simple: a fire, some beers, and stargazing. The October night was clear and crisp, that dry New England air hanging around us. We set up just off the main parking area, sheltered by big pine trees blocking the wind. Nate spread out an old camping blanket, and Jess brought a therm, Oz of coffee she'd prepared earlier. Sam tossed logs into the fire pit, and flames began crackling as the sun dipped below the horizon. I've never been much into star maps or constellations, but I love the quiet of being away from everything. We all lay back, faces turned skyward, with the Milky Way stretched above us like a giant spilled bucket of diamonds. Our conversation drifted casually. Work, dumb mistakes, movies we hated. Then Jess pointed up near Orion's belt. "Look at that," she said. I followed her finger and saw a cluster of lights. 5 or 6, I think. They weren't blinking like typical airplanes or satellites. Instead, they held steady, forming a perfect triangle. Not just any triangle, but one that looked drawn with a ruler, sharp, clean edges. And it was spinning slowly, almost hypnotically. Sam squinted. "That's weird. I don't think I've seen anything move like that before." We all fell silent. The fire continued to crackle. Later, lights flickered back. Even the soda machine outside the grocery store started humming again. We waited another hour. Nobody saw anything else. People drifted back inside. I walked home and checked the power panel. Everything seemed normal. The microwave clock was blinking, but otherwise fine. I wrote down the time and made a note about what I'd seen, just to ensure I wasn't misremembering. The next morning, I called the power company again. They reported no outage logged for Elton's Fork. No system issues, no downlines, nothing at all in the area. Days later, I asked Curtis if anyone higher up had investigated. He just shook his head, saying the whole incident was logged as anomalous but non-critical. That was 2 years ago. As far as I know, it's never happened again. The sky went silent, holding its breath around us. A triangle of lights rotated, then began to break apart. Its perfect points pulled away from each other, exploding into scattered individual dots. Those lights moved in ways that defied explanation. They weren't planes or satellites, but something entirely different. One shot straight up with an impossible sharp zigzag, while another dropped rapidly behind the trees. The rest scattered like fireflies, vanishing in seconds. The entire event lasted barely half a minute. We sat frozen, stunned into silence. The campfire flickered, casting shadows across our shocked faces. "That was not normal," Nate whispered, breaking the stillness. Jess nodded, her skin pale in the dim light. An unsettling feeling crept over me, as if those lights were watching, aware of our presence. Sam tried to lighten the mood by adding another log to the fire, but tension hung thick in the air. We kept scanning the dark tree line, expecting movement, finding nothing. Then our phones died. No signal, no GPS, no connection. The location arrow froze, seemingly lost. I rebooted my phone repeatedly, but nothing changed. "It's like we're completely off the grid," Jess muttered. The woods transformed around us. Shadows deepened, becoming almost solid. Usual forest sounds vanished. No wind, no distant animal calls. A strange hum vibrated beneath our skin, not mechanical, but something else entirely. Nerves fraying, we packed up early. Nate grabbed the flashlight, and we huddled close while hiking back. The trail felt different, unnaturally quiet, darker than moonlight should allow. Halfway down, I stopped. Something felt wrong. Glancing back toward our previous clearing, I caught a brief glimpse of a pale, hovering light just above the tree line. Then it was gone. I was on my second night in the Anaconda-Pintler Wilderness, deep in western Montana, hiking a solo 3-night loop through the high ridgelines. Early September brought warm days and cold nights, with a forecast promising clear skies all week. Near a small alpine lake called Goat's Mirror, I'd set up camp that afternoon with just my dog Wren, a wire-haired pointing griffin who's about 50 pounds and definitely tougher than me. Normally, Wren sleeps outside the tent, tethered but free to move. This night was different. She stayed unusually close, and I didn't think much of it at first. After cooking lentils and rice on my small stove and feeding her, we sat on a flat rock above the lake as the sun dropped behind the ridge. The air was still, that deep quiet you only experience above 7,000 feet. Wren kept turning her head, listening to something in the trees. I assumed it was deer or maybe a porcupine, but nothing ever appeared. She never barked, just kept glancing over her shoulder while cleaning her paws. When the cold drove us inside, I crawled into the tent with a book. Later, driving back to town after the hike, something strange happened. "Did you guys see that?" I asked, but I wasn't sure what I'd seen. Sam was already looking around. The hairs on my neck stood up. In the parking lot, everything looked normal. As I sat in my car trying to calm my racing heart, Jess's phone buzzed. An unknown number had sent a message, just 3 white dots. The typing indicator suggested someone was writing but never sent anything. No reply came. We sat staring at our phones, feeling like something had brushed past us, leaving an unexplainable mark. The drive was quiet. The night felt heavy, like something lingered just out of sight. At home, I kept checking my phone. The signal returned, but the message was gone without a trace. I've told a few people, but nobody believes me. Maybe it was a trick of light, a cluster of drones, or some weird atmospheric phenomenon. I don't know. But sometimes, when I'm outside late and the sky is clear, I find myself looking for that triangle again. And I wonder what those lights were, and what it meant that they were watching us. I was out camping with Ren, and that night was different from the start. Usually, she hates being zipped into the tent with me, gets antsy and warm. But this time, she just curled up quietly against my hip, barely moving. Around 1 a.m., a full bladder forced me awake. No chance of sleeping through that. I carefully unzipped the tent, stepping out in socks and long underwear, trying not to disturb her. The moonless night was bright with stars, so bright I could see my own shadow on the ground. The silence struck me immediately. No wind, no water sounds. The lake was perfectly still, which felt odd. At that altitude, you'd normally hear a cricket or a distant owl, but nothing. I walked a few steps from the tent, did what I needed behind a boulder, and was about to return when I looked up. The Milky Way was stunning, dense, like someone had painted it across the sky. I felt small, standing there, corny, but true. Then something strange happened. A small cluster of stars, maybe 5 or 6, simply vanished. Not obscured by clouds, just gone, as if someone had placed a black sheet over them. I thought I'd imagined it at first, but when I focused, more stars began to disappear. 2 here, then a larger patch, about a dozen in an arc. The sky remained crystal clear, no haze, no light pollution. Whatever was blocking the stars did so cleanly, without fade or shimmer. Ren emerged from the tent silently, sitting beside me. Her ears were raised, her nose twitching. I felt something massive moving overhead, invisible but present. You could only track its movement by the stars it erased. We watched together, motionless. Stars continued vanishing in a slow downward drift, like something was gradually sinking toward us. At one point, I thought I glimpsed its edge, just a hint of something immense and unknown. I'd been craving some time out in the woods without anyone around. No cell signal, no noise, except for whatever the forest made. So I picked a spot a couple hours from the city, deep in the green, mountains of Vermont, near a little trail called Bald Rock Loop. It was early October, just after the leaves had started to turn, and the weather was cool but clear. I got there in the afternoon, set up my tent in a little clearing by a creek, and spent the day hiking and reading. Nothing weird at all. That night, after I'd eaten some pasta and started winding down, I laid back in my sleeping bag and listened. The forest was quiet, but not dead quiet. A few crickets chirped, the creek babbled nearby, and now and then a squirrel scampered through the underbrush. The moon was about half full, so it was easy enough to see outside the tent through the mesh. I was just about to doze off when I heard it. The first time I caught it, I thought maybe a branch had snapped or a big bird had flown by. But it wasn't like any normal forest noise. It was this low, slow whoosh, like something massive moving through the treetops just above the canopy. Sort of a rustling, but much bigger, like a huge wing sweeping the tops of the trees. It lasted maybe 10 seconds. Then I saw something, an outline against the stars. Not a shape I could describe, but more like a curve, a slight impossible arc where stars used to be. It wasn't lit, it wasn't reflecting anything, just this subtle absence. My chest felt tight, not like a panic attack, but like pressure, like the air was denser. Ren leaned into my leg a little, her tail was curled under. Then, just as slowly, the stars started coming back in reverse, the exact same order. First one, then a few, then more. Like whatever it was had backed away. No sound, no lights, just this creeping feeling that something had changed. Once the sky looked normal again, I stayed out there another 10-15 minutes, half expecting it to return. Ren stayed right next to me the whole time. I eventually got back in the tent, but I didn't sleep much. Every time I started to drift off, I imagined that black curve above me, blocking the sky. At sunrise, I packed up early. We skipped breakfast and were on the trail by 7. I didn't want to hang around that lake. We hiked hard that day, 15 miles instead of the planned 10. Camped lower, closer to the trailhead. The sky was cloudy that night. I didn't look up once. A strange sound jolted me awake in the middle of the night. It was a slow whoosh, like something massive brushing over the trees, lasting just a few seconds before stopping completely. I froze, holding my breath, waiting for any sign of movement or noise. Nothing stirred. The forest around me felt different. No animals were running, no branches cracking. Even the usual nighttime sounds seemed muted, as if everything had paused. Cautiously, I unzipped the tent and peeked out. Moonlight stretched long shadows between the trees, and the air was unnaturally still. Barefoot, I stepped onto the soft ground, careful not to break the silence. My flashlight swept across the tree line, revealing no shadows, no shapes, no glowing eyes. The creek had fallen almost completely silent. More unsettling was the absolute absence of insect sounds. No crickets, no frogs, no night birds calling. It felt like the entire forest was holding its breath, watching and waiting. I tried to rationalize the sound, thinking maybe it was a large bird, but something didn't feel right. The silence wasn't natural. It was heavy, expectant. Around 2 a.m., the sound returned. This time it lasted longer, about 15 seconds. When it stopped, the silence seemed even deeper. The creek had stopped flowing entirely. I remained in the tent, listening to my own heartbeat and the oppressive stillness. Just before dawn, around 4:30 a.m., the forest slowly awakened. Birds began to sing. The creek started babbling, crickets chirped, and a slight breeze rustled the leaves. By sunrise, I was packed and heading back to my car, the mysterious sound and that eerie silence replaying in my mind. I spent a week in the Blue Ridge Mountains, conducting field research on salamander populations. Deep Creek Valley is far from a tourist hotspot, just thick forests, a few dirt roads, and an eerie silence that feels like something's missing. My campsite was tucked beside a small stream, perfect for the moisture-loving species I was studying. Early October brought warm days but chilly nights. I enjoyed the solitude, with only occasional bird calls or rustling animals breaking the quiet. My evenings typically involved sitting by the fire, writing notes or reading. But on the third day, something changed. A strange low hum began to emerge. At first, it was barely perceptible, almost like a distant machine drone, yet nothing mechanical was nearby. I wondered if it might be a generator from a far-off campsite, but the area was too remote. When I asked the ranger during a supply run, he dismissed it as wind or an animal sound. But this wasn't typical nature noise. The sound was steady, continuous, and unnervingly deep. It seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. I'd catch myself stopping mid-task, just listening. It was subtle, only noticeable during complete stillness. I attempted to record the hum using my field microphones and portable recorder. Each time, something strange happened. Instrument levels would spike or cut out entirely. Recordings came back filled with static, or the devices would freeze completely, as if the hum was interfering with the equipment. One evening, I set up microphones around my camp and put on my headphones, determined to capture the sound. For about 10 minutes, I heard a faint, constant drone beneath the ambient noise. But the moment I hit record, it vanished, like someone had flipped a switch. Silence returned, punctuated only by crickets and creek splashes. I looked around, half expecting to see something unusual. Nothing. The next day, I meticulously checked my instruments, and afterward, I don't know what I heard. I don't know what I saw. And honestly, I'm not sure I want to know. I was hiking alone in the southern Cascades during early October, on a day that started clear and cold, but softened into a damp, foggy afternoon. My dog Huck, usually bursting with energy and sniffing every tree and rock, was unusually quiet. We'd been following a rough trail up through the forest, moving slowly as the fog rolled in thicker than expected. Around mid-afternoon, we reached a clearing nestled between tall pines. It wasn't marked on any map, and the ground looked strange. The moss and needles seemed muted, almost as if the earth had dulled its own vibrancy. Huck slowed down to sniff, but didn't paw or dig like he normally would. Something felt off. That night, the hum returned, louder than before, but still low and steady. I sat outside wrapped in a jacket, watching stars peek through the treetops. The hum seemed to fill the entire valley. Yet whenever I tried to approach its source, it grew quieter and would vanish completely if I stopped moving. An odd sensation hung in the air. The valley felt like it was holding its breath, or maybe I was. It wasn't frightening, exactly, just a feeling that something was fundamentally wrong. At one point, I glimpsed a shadow sliding silently between tree trunks. Not a deer or bird, just a dark shape. I called out softly, but received no response. When I looked again, it had disappeared. The next morning, local hikers I encountered mentioned noticing the hum, but only when deep in the valley. They assumed it was a natural sound or wind through rocks, and none had attempted to record it. By the last day, I felt more unsettled than scared. The hum followed me like an unseen presence as I packed up slowly. When I started my truck's engine, the radio briefly went to static before clearing. Driving away, the valley fell silent behind me. Back home, I checked my recordings one final time. Nothing but static and silence remained. The valley, its low sound, and the strange effects on my equipment stayed an unresolved mystery. I was walking through the forest with Huck when something strange happened. As I stepped into a particular clearing, the usual forest sounds vanished. My footsteps made no noise on the pine needles, feeling firm but unnaturally quiet. When I called Huck's name, my voice sounded muffled and distant, as if heard through a thick wall. Huck stood about 10 feet away, looking at me but not responding. I tried whistling, a sharp, clear signal I'd used during his training, but the sound was bizarrely muted. He tilted his head, confused, and just stared without moving. Something felt off. Stepping back to the clearing's edge, everything suddenly returned to normal. My footsteps crunched, my voice sounded natural, and Huck trotted over, wagging his tail. The fog in the clearing seemed thicker, swirling in slow, heavy curls different from the rest of the forest mist. Curiosity pulled me back into the patch. Immediately, the sound warped again. My voice became distant, footsteps deadened. Even branch creaks and leaf rustlings felt muted, like everything was underwater or trapped in a sealed box. I pulled out my phone to record. Outside the patch, the mic picked up normal ambient noise. Inside, the recording dropped to near silence. Playback was bizarre, a low, distorted hum with barely discernible, muffled words underneath. Huck remained tense, sniffing the clearing's edges without barking. I searched for a natural explanation, maybe a hidden cave or water source. Nothing. No birds, no insects, no animals anywhere nearby. The usual forest sounds had completely disappeared. Unsettled, I packed up and left, the mysterious clearing behind me. I live on the edge of a small Vermont town, surrounded by open fields and woods. This is why I love taking my border collie mix, Ludo, out here. It's quiet, and he can run around off-leash. One cool October afternoon, with a stiff western wind and low clouds threatening rain, we crossed the gravel road by our neighborhood and stepped onto the big open field next to Miller's farm. Normally, Ludo loves this spot. He's energetic and enjoys chasing rabbits and whatever else catches his eye. But that day, something felt different. The moment we approached the field, he stopped, ears flat, refusing to go in. At first, I thought he might have sensed a coyote or smelled something unusual. I called him over, but he wouldn't move. His low growl and stiff, raised tail suggested he was on high alert. I figured he was being protective or anxious because of the wind. Yet the way he stared into the empty field seemed strange. Trying to calm him, I started walking toward the field, hoping to coax him inside. Instead, he suddenly bolted backwards, barking loudly in a way I'd never heard before. The strangest part was the absolute silence that followed. No animals ran, no birds flew. It was as if the entire landscape had frozen. Later, hiking back the same route with my friend Snath, an unsettling feeling of being watched persisted. Huck, my companion's dog, kept glancing back toward the clearing, his ears pricked and tail low. Once we were on the main trail, I noticed a peculiar smell, like ozone or burnt metal, lingering in the air. Huck stopped and growled softly, looking past me into the trees. I turned, but saw nothing. When I looked back, the smell had vanished. I didn't share the experience initially, thinking it sounded ridiculous, but I couldn't stop thinking about that patch of land where sound seemed to stop working, how the dogs behaved so strangely, and that weird metallic odor afterward. Since then, I've avoided hiking that part of the forest. I don't know if I'll ever return. It doesn't make sense, and I can't explain it. Sometimes I wonder if I even want to understand what happened that day. Ludo wouldn't stop barking, his eyes fixed on a spot about 30 feet ahead where the grass dipped into a shallow ditch. I knelt down, expecting to see an animal like a fox or stray dog, but found nothing except dry grass and fallen leaves swirling in the breeze. He continued barking for nearly an hour, and I started pacing, watching his body language. He was tense, but no longer growling, just persistently barking as if warning me about something. The sky darkened and the wind intensified. A few raindrops hit my face, and I decided we should head back. When I grabbed his collar to leash him, something unprecedented happened. He snapped at my hand. This was completely out of character for him, and I felt deeply uneasy. I'd never seen him act aggressively, especially toward me. I tried calming him with a soft voice, but he backed away into the trees bordering the field, continuing to bark. After a few minutes, he stopped barking and simply stared, unmoving, at the same spot. When I crouched beside him, I noticed something strange about the atmosphere. The sound seemed muffled, as if we were wrapped in a thick blanket. Wind and bird noises were subdued, and even the smell of damp earth felt dulled. Reaching out to touch the grass where Ludo was staring, the hair on my arm stood up. The ground was inexplicably cold despite the earlier warmth. Ludo's eyes were wide, showing more white than usual. Suddenly, a low hum emerged, barely audible at first, like a vibration in the air, but growing steadily louder. His ears flattened, and he crouched low, trembling. This wasn't a natural sound. No birds, no insects, just a deep, constant noise that made my chest feel tight. I tried to record it on my phone, but the moment I hit record, the hum stopped abruptly, as if someone had flipped a switch. Silence descended. The forest road near Bend, Oregon was quiet that early September night. Clear skies stretched overhead as Jared, Mia, and I set up camp in a small clearing. The weather was perfect, cool but not cold. Everything seemed normal until something changed. Ludo, my dog, suddenly became alert. The silence that followed was heavier than before. He stood completely still, head down, watching me with intense eyes. I felt isolated, as if we were in our own bubble, cut off from the surrounding world. Gradually, forest sounds returned. Birds chirped, wind rustled through trees. But Ludo refused to step into a specific area of the field. Rain began falling steadily, and I decided we should leave. When I gently tugged his collar, he reluctantly followed, his body stiff and cautious. He kept looking back, as if something might be trailing us. At home, Ludo collapsed on the floor. He was panting hard and shaking. For hours, he lay there, eyes wide open, watching shadows on the walls. He wouldn't eat or drink. I sat beside him, rubbing his ears, trying to understand what had happened. Later, I checked the phone recording, but it captured only static and faint wind noise. The strange humming was completely absent, as if it had never existed. The next day, I returned to the field in daylight. I walked directly to the spot Ludo had been fixated on. Nothing seemed unusual. The grass looked normal. No holes, markings, or animal signs were visible. The air felt completely ordinary. When I tried to call Ludo to join me, he stopped short, barking low and tensely. I didn't force him. Since that day, he avoids the field entirely. During walks nearby, he'll suddenly stop, staring intensely into the grass and growling quietly. I never see anything. I don't understand the mysterious humming or why it disappeared when I tried to record it. I can't explain Ludo's extreme reaction or why he barked for hours until exhausted. I only know one thing, something about hat ground isn't right. Whatever it is, it's still there, waiting. Just a dog who knows something I don't, and a silence too heavy to be natural. We were camping, enjoying a quiet evening by the campfire. Nell, my little terrier mix, usually stayed close but occasionally wandered to explore the forest edges. After dinner, Jared cracked open some beers and Mia pulled out her guitar. We relaxed, laughing and chatting after a long day of hiking. As the fire died down, we fell silent and gazed up at the stars. I've always loved stargazing, finding something deeply calming in the vast, still night sky. That's when we first noticed something strange. At first, it was subtle. Stars normally twinkle, but this was different. A small patch of sky just above our tents started to ripple, not like wind, but similar to heat waves shimmering over hot pavement. The air seemed to bend and warp. I blinked, wondering if I was seeing things, but Jared had noticed too. He nudged Mia, asking, "Are you seeing this?" She nodded, her eyes wide. The weird part was how localized it was. Everything else looked completely normal. Just this 20 or 30-degree section directly over our campsite was distorting. Nell sat by my feet, unusually calm but with her ears twitching, listening to something we couldn't hear. The ripples moved slowly, like a gentle wave across water. The stars didn't disappear, but their light bent and stretched, as if someone had smudged a piece of glass over them. Gradually, the ripples expanded but remained contained. Then, just as slowly, the effect faded, returning the sky to its normal state. I realized I'd been holding my breath. We exchanged bewildered looks. Jared broke the silence. What the hell was that? None of us had an answer. Mia suggested it might be some atmospheric phenomenon, but we couldn't explain why it happened only above our tent. The rest of the night felt off. The woods were unnaturally quiet. No crickets, no owls, just silence. Nell stayed close, her nose twitching with an alertness that made us uneasy. Something had changed, though we couldn't say what. Here's the rewritten version. My name's Eli. I'm 17, and life around here is usually pretty normal. That night changed everything. I was in the garage, almost done putting away tools near the back window. It's an old glass pane, slightly foggy, where you can catch a faint reflection when it's dark inside and light outside. Later, during our camping trip, strange things started happening. I wandered a bit from our campsite, noticing how unusually dark the forest had become. Twigs snapped around me, but whenever I turned to look, nothing was there. The moon hid behind clouds, making everything harder to see. Back at camp, odd electronic glitches began. Jared struggled with his phone, its screen flickering weirdly between black and on. Mia's flashlight acted up too, seeming like it was dying despite fresh batteries. We laughed it off, joking about the forest interfering with our devices. Before dawn, something truly unsettling occurred. I woke up and peered outside our tent. The air felt heavy and cold. A faint mist filled the clearing, but something else was different. Small, steady points of light drifted between trees, not fireflies, but something more deliberate, like tiny lanterns hovering just above the ground. I quietly woke Mia and Jared. They saw them too. The lights moved slowly, silently between the trees, then blinked out one by one. We packed up quickly and left without much discussion. During the drive home, I kept watching the sky, hoping to understand what we'd witnessed. The stars looked normal again, but something had fundamentally shifted. I still can't explain what happened that night, just a strange patch of sky and those inexplicable lights. Nell seems different since then. She's become quieter, more watchful on walks, as if she remembers something we don't, something we can't quite grasp. That's the story. That's what happened. A strange flash lit up the backyard one night, brighter than anything I'd seen before. Not like lightning or a passing car, but sharp and intense, almost like a camera flash, but way more powerful. It lasted just a second, filling the entire space with light. A low hum seemed to accompany the flash, though I couldn't be certain if it was real or just in my imagination. When I glanced at the window, my reflection looked slightly off. My movements didn't quite sync up right. When I lifted my hand to close the garage door, my reflection hesitated, its hand moving a beat slower, as if lagging behind my actual motion. I blinked and shook my head, and when I looked again, everything seemed normal. But the moment had unsettled me. I told my mom about the weird experience, but she brushed it off, saying I was probably tired or imagining things. The next day, I noticed something else strange. My phone's clock appeared to freeze around the same time as the flash, stuck at 11:43 p.m. for several seconds before suddenly jumping forward. I was certain my phone wasn't malfunctioning. That night, I decided to investigate. I sat on the garage floor, watching the window intently. Right around 11:43 p.m., the flash returned, less intense this time, but unmistakably present. Again, my reflection moved with an odd delay, creating a sense of being slightly out of sync with the world. Over the following days, the pattern continued. The flash appeared every night at exactly 11:43 p.m. Each time, my reflection would lag behind my movements. Sometimes it would blink too slowly or smile just a moment after I did. An eerie feeling grew, like I was witnessing something I wasn't meant to see, a subtle disruption in reality that I couldn't explain. The window reflection had always been a bit off, but one night it became truly unsettling. I was waving my arms and jumping in front of it, and instead of mirroring me smoothly, the reflection hesitated and copied my movements awkwardly, like a poorly buffering video. When I showed my sister Marin, She saw nothing unusual. Her shrug only heightened my growing unease. After that night, something changed. Around 11:40 p.m., a strange pressure would build near the window. Shadows in the backyard caught my eye during random flashes, not quite animal or human, just drifting unnaturally. I decided to investigate, walking outside to check if street lights or neighbors' porch lights were causing the strange effect. The yard was dark and silent. Looking up at the trees revealed nothing, but then I noticed the neighbor's window was dark, despite their car being in the driveway. For a split second, I glimpsed a figure behind their curtains. When I blinked, it vanished. I rushed back inside and locked the door, but the feeling of being watched remained. Time seemed to warp during these moments. My phone clock would freeze or jump ahead minutes inexplicably. When I jokingly mentioned a possible parallel universe to my history teacher, he dismissed it as stress from school and college applications. One night, I watched the window intently until midnight. The reflection suddenly froze while I was moving. Then, mysteriously, the glass fogged up from the inside, though I was alone and the garage was cool. After wiping away the fog, the reflection returned to normal. The experience was unnerving enough that I stopped watching so closely. Within a week, the strange flashes ceased. The reflection became perfectly normal again, and my phone clock stopped glitching. But the memory of those bizarre moments lingered. There's something about that window that haunts me. Every time I pass by, especially in the dark, I catch a slight movement in the glass that doesn't quite match my own steps. It's subtle, just enough to make me stop and wonder. Was it electrical interference, a strange reflection from the foggy surface, or something else entirely? I've never shared this with anyone. It sounds too bizarre. But each time I look at that window, I'm struck by the unsettling sensation of seeing myself just a moment too late, like I'm watching someone else's reflection. That feeling lingers. It happened on a late-night drive home from the diner, the kind of shift where exhaustion is your only companion. Around 1:30 in the morning, Highway 79 stretched out between Prescott and Jerome, Arizona, a vast, empty desert. My old Honda's engine hummed, and a distant radio station crackled weakly. About 20 minutes past the last town, headlights appeared behind me. In the middle of nowhere, that's always strange. At first, I dismissed them as another weary traveler. But something felt off. These lights didn't behave like normal headlights. They remained perfectly steady, moving with an unnatural consistency. When I glanced in the rearview mirror, my blood ran cold. No car. No vehicle outline, just two smooth, perfectly round orbs, white and yellow, hovering 4 or 5 feet above the ground. They followed me with eerie precision, maintaining the same distance regardless of my speed. I blinked hard, convinced my tired eyes were deceiving me. Maybe a moon reflection or some roadside trick of light? But the highway was empty. No signs, no other illumination, nothing that could explain those floating orbs. As they drew closer, their light seemed impossibly pure, almost ethereal. The highway stretched out before me, empty and dark. Suddenly, glowing orbs appeared, not reflecting light but seeming to generate it themselves. They hung motionless beside my car, calm and steady. I reached to turn off the radio, thinking the static might be playing tricks on my eyes, but the orbs remained unchanged. Scanning the back window revealed nothing behind them, just an empty desert road and distant hills silhouetted against the night sky. I wasn't scared, just confused and slightly on edge. My phone sat dead on the passenger seat, leaving me without a way to call or verify anything. I considered pulling over to investigate, but something inexplicable kept me driving. An unnatural silence enveloped me. The orbs made no sound, no engine noise, no humming, nothing. After what seemed like minutes, they suddenly shifted. Rising slightly higher, they split apart, one drifting left, the other right. Their movement was deliberate and smooth, as if they were observing me, waiting. My heart raced. The orbs hovered just off the road, about 20 feet apart, but close enough for me to see their edges clearly. In a moment of panic, I looked down briefly to steady myself. When I looked up again, they had vanished completely. No flickering, no dimming, no gradual departure, just instant disappearance. I slammed on the brakes, sliding onto the gravel shoulder. Jumping out, I scanned the surroundings. Nothing. The desert remained silent, stars bright and cold overhead, with no other lights visible. I stood there for 10 minutes, searching the horizon, but found no trace of the orbs. Returning to the car, I drove home more slowly, constantly checking the rearview mirror. The road stayed empty. When I told my roommate Carly, she laughed it off, suggesting I was hallucinating from working too many late nights. But I knew what I'd seen. What made the experience truly strange was how the orbs behaved. They weren't like any vehicle or mechanical object. They didn't change speed or flash. They simply hovered quietly, perfectly steady, as if watching, not rushing anywhere. Their sudden, complete disappearance defied any logical explanation. I was walking home late one night from my friend's place in the Eastwood neighborhood. The street was quiet, with only occasional cars passing by very few minutes. It was a chilly spring evening, just after midnight, and the old sodium lamps cast their steady orange glow along the sidewalks. Halfway home, just past the corner where Maple Drive meets Chestnut, something felt off. I noticed my shadow stretching far longer than it should have been. Under a normal streetlight, it should have been about my height, but this shadow extended almost to the curb on the opposite side of the street. At first, I thought it might be a trick of light or my tired eyes. I turned to look back, expecting to see another light causing this strange effect. But there was nothing, just the usual evenly spaced streetlights glowing their dull orange. Then the shadow flickered. This wasn't like a normal shadow movement. It was a brief pulse where the shadow almost vanished for a fraction of a second before snapping back into shape. I blinked hard, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. The street was empty. Watching carefully, I kept walking. The shadow stretched and flickered again, and something felt deeply wrong. It seemed to pulse in sync with something inside my head, matching what felt like my heartbeat, though my pulse seemed steady. I started to speed up, an uneasy feeling growing. The sensation of being watched crept over me. Glancing around, I saw nothing. The street lights remained unchanged, with dim yellow porch lights barely illuminating the houses I passed. Now, I don't drive that stretch of highway late at night anymore. I keep thinking there might be a logical explanation, a trick of light, a drone, something. But nothing fits right. It was like something was there, and then it wasn't, vanishing without a trace around a corner. It was like they were never there. There was no breeze, no rustling in the trees, no distant dog bark or car door slam broke the eerie silence. I pulled out my phone, 12:17 a.m. Maybe calling Leah would ground me, bring some normalcy. As I fumbled with my phone, a shadow flickered nearby, stretching past the curb onto the grass. The street light above me flickered once, but didn't dim. Something felt off. The shadow seemed to move independently, disconnected from the light source. Halfway down the block, subtle changes caught my eye. A porch light that was dark earlier now glowed. Curtains that had been drawn were suddenly open, revealing empty rooms. The street itself felt like it was subtly shifting while my back was turned. I glanced behind me. In the darkness, a figure near a distant lamppost caught my attention. But when I blinked, it vanished. My skin prickled, and I pulled my jacket tighter. The shadow's behavior grew stranger. It looked almost broken, with jagged edges. For a moment, it split into two shadows, slightly out of sync and overlapping. Crouching down, I stared at the pavement. This wasn't just a shadow anymore. It moved with an unsettling, living quality. I checked my phone. Battery normal. Time unchanged. Taking a deep breath, I decided to run the remaining blocks home. Suddenly, the streetlight went completely dark. Pitch blackness enveloped me. The flickering shadow disappeared instantly. An unnatural silence descended. No city sounds, no background noise. Just absolute quiet. Seconds later, the light snapped back. My shadow returned to normal, short and right at my feet, exactly as it should be. I'd been camping near Devil's Creek for a couple of nights in late October, about 2 hours north of Boise. I'd found the spot through some old hiking forums, a quiet, remote location mostly covered in forest with a small clearing where I set up my tent. Early fall was always my favorite time for camping. Cool, but not freezing, with most bugs already gone. I was hoping to spend some time hiking and getting away from everything before the first real snow arrived. The night before I left, the air felt crisp but not old. I checked the weather on my phone before turning it off. Around 38 degrees Fs. which seemed typical for that time of year. After making a fire and cooking some canned chili, I sat by the flames until they died down. Then I crawled into my sleeping bag, zipped the tent shut, and tried to get some rest. I woke up early the next morning, around 6:30 before sunrise. It was still dark, but my headlamp helped me navigate. As I shuffled out of the tent and looked around to get my bearings, something caught my eye about 10 feet from where I'd pitched my tent. There was a perfectly circular patch of frost, about the size of a large dinner plate. It looked almost like someone had used a cookie cutter or stencil to create it. The frost was thick and white, almost sparkling in the faint dawn light. The rest of the ground was just damp earth and dry leaves, with no frost anywhere else. When I ran my fingers across it, I was struck by how unusual it was. A few nights later, walking home after midnight, I noticed something strange with the streetlights. A shadow seemed to move differently, not just flickering, but moving as if it had its own thoughts. I didn't wait to see if it would happen again. I jogged home quickly, avoiding looking behind me. Once inside and with the door locked, I stood by the window for a long time, watching the street. Nothing unusual happened after that. The next day, I told Leah about it. She suggested the streetlights might be old, with faulty wiring causing weird shadow effects, but I wasn't convinced. I'd walked that route hundreds of times and never seen anything like it. I checked again a couple of nights later, at the same time and spot. No flickering shadow, no blackout, just normal streetlights and normal shadows. Sometimes I wonder if it was electrical interference or just my imagination playing tricks in the dark. But the shadow hadn't just flickered. It moved like it was alive, separate from me. I still don't know what it was. But since that night, I haven't walked that route alone after midnight. The morning light revealed something strange, a perfect circle of frost on the ground, surrounded by normal dirt. I touched the icy patch, feeling its unexpected coldness, then felt the regular soil just inches away. Nothing made sense. The air wasn't cold enough to create frost, and I hadn't noticed any signs of freezing temperatures during the night. I walked around the circle, searching for an explanation. No footprints, no animal tracks, nothing unusual marked the area. I tried to recall if I'd done anything the previous night that might explain this phenomenon. I dumped some warm water to extinguish my campfire, but that was far from this spot. As sunlight crept across the ground, the frost shimmered briefly before melting, transforming into tiny water droplets that seeped into the dirt. While packing up camp, I felt like something was watching me, though I dismissed it as the isolation playing tricks on my mind. Later, I met a couple of hikers on the trail who confirmed they'd experienced a clear night with no frost anywhere else. They jokingly mentioned ghost frost and ghost circles, but we had no real explanation. Back at my car, I double-checked the local weather report. Nothing indicated temperatures low enough to create frost. I've since searched online and in nature books for similar phenomena, but found nothing matching my experience. I've returned to Devil's Creek several times since that day, in different seasons, but never encountered anything like that perfect frozen circle again. Was it a rare atmospheric event, or something I can't explain? The mystery has stayed with me, an unexplained moment that defies rational understanding. The late September afternoon hung crisp and clear over Lake Wallowa as I guided my old aluminum boat across the water. I'd been fishing these shore since childhood, knowing every current and hidden rock like the back of my hand. The small dock disappeared behind me as I pulled the motor low and slow, careful not to disturb the fish. My destination was a familiar cove on the west side, where submerged rocks always promised a good catch. Basic gear surrounded me, a spinning rod, a few lures, and my grandfather's magnetic compass. That compass was more than just a tool. It was a family heirloom I kept tucked by the console, essential for navigating this expansive lake on cloudy days. Halfway to the cove, the sky began to change. Thick gray clouds rolled over the mountains, stretching and darkening the horizon. They looked heavy, the kind that might bring rain, but I wasn't worried. I'd been out in conditions like these plenty of times before. Out of habit, I glanced at the compass. In an instant, everything changed. The needle started spinning wildly, not a gentle drift, but a complete, dizzying rotation. It blurred like a tiny tornado trapped under glass, spinning faster and faster. I squinted, half expecting it to land somewhere completely off magnetic north. Just as suddenly as it began, the spinning stopped. The needle snapped back to its original position, pointing steady and true. I blinked and looked up. The clouds hung low like a heavy ceiling, but no thunder or rain had arrived. The wind shifted slightly, but nothing seemed particularly unusual. I scanned the lake. No other boats disturbed the glassy surface, just my little aluminum vessel bobbing gently. Something strange had happened, but for the moment, everything looked perfectly normal. The lake had gone eerily quiet. No splashing fish or distant bird calls broke the stillness, and even the wind seemed muted. I'd been fishing for a while, casting my line repeatedly without a single bite. Something felt off from the start. The compass had spun strangely earlier, though I'd checked for any nearby magnets or electronics and found nothing. The sky darkened as thick clouds rolled overhead, dimming the light and making the water look colder and deeper. A weird prickling sensation crept across my skin, like the early stages of a coming cold. I pulled out my phone to check the weather, but the signal was gone. The screen flickered oddly, blanking out for a second before returning to normal. Then I saw it. About a quarter mile across the lake, near a cluster of trees, a large, dark figure stood motionless. It wasn't like any animal or person I recognized, just a strange, upright shape that seemed to be watching me. I rubbed my eyes, blinking hard. When I looked again, the figure had vanished. I couldn't tell if I'd imagined it or if it had slipped behind the trees. A sinking feeling told me I wasn't alone. Without hesitation, I started the motor and turned the boat toward the dock. The compass remained steady now, but I kept a careful eye on it anyway. As I headed back, the clouds grew heavier, almost completely blocking out the light. Something unexplained had happened, and I wasn't about to stick around to find out what. The night shift at the industrial park on the town's edge was usually quiet. As a student working security, I'd been on duty since 10 p.m., monitoring cameras and making occasional rounds. This particular Wednesday morning was cold, around 38 degrees F, with a light breeze rustling through bare trees. Earlier that day, I'd been out on Lake Wallowa, an experience that still lingered in my mind. Something about that lake felt different, unsettled, as if caught between what's visible and what isn't. The compass I'd brought that day had spun unexpectedly, and I'd glimpsed a strange figure near the trees. When I mentioned it to friends, they dismissed it as weather or imagination. Around 2:30 a.m., while scanning the security feeds, a motionless figure at the far end of the parking lot caught my attention. Standing near an unused loading dock, this person was completely still, like a statue. Concerned about a potential break-in, I zoomed in and called the local police non-emergency line. The camera resolution wasn't great, but the figure was unmistakable. No movement, no blinking, no change in stance. I watched, waiting for the patrol car to arrive. The incident reminded me of that day on the lake, that sense of something watching, just beneath the surface. Back home later, I'd checked my compass. It worked perfectly fine. Yet every time I held it, I half expected the needle to start spinning again. I haven't returned to Lake Wallowa since that day. Not out of fear, but because something about the place felt fundamentally altered. As the night shift continued, and the police responded to my call, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more happening than met the eye, both at the industrial park and on that mysterious lake. The parking lot was quiet, with just a phone light casting a dim glow. Standing near the middle, a lone figure seemed to stare off into nothing. No car, no other people, nothing explained why someone would be there in the dead of night. At 3:05 a.m., a patrol car rolled down the main entrance road. As its headlights approached, something bizarre happened. The moment the car passed where the figure stood, it simply vanished. Not a blur, not a fade, just gone. Empty space. The patrol car stopped, its spotlight sweeping the lot. Officers stepped out, flashlights cutting through the darkness. I kept the camera feed locked on the spot, expecting the figure to reappear. 30 seconds later, it did. Same pose, same location, completely motionless. I rewound the footage, confirming what I'd seen. Every time a vehicle or person came within 20 feet, the figure would disappear for 5 to 10 seconds before returning exactly as it was. A delivery truck passed through. The figure vanished. When the truck moved on, it reappeared, unmoving. Calling my supervisor, I described the strange occurrence. She suggested checking for camera glitches. I'd already switched to a backup camera, and the effect remained consistent. Both feeds showed the same vanishing act. Ground officers found nothing. No footprints, no signs of any presence. They searched everywhere, the lot, bushes, fence line. The figure was never spotted in person. After an hour, it stopped disappearing, remaining still even as patrol cars and workers passed nearby. As the morning shift arrived and cars began filling the lot, the figure finally disappeared. The first delivery truck at 6:15 a.m. marked its final absence. I live in a small neighborhood just outside Asheville, North Carolina, where everyone knows each other and nothing out of the ordinary ever happens. But that changed one night during my security shift. The cameras caught something that defied explanation. When I first saw the footage, I spent the morning analyzing every detail. The figure appeared on 2 different camera systems, perfectly synced with no interference or distortions. A man in his mid-30s, wearing a dark jacket and jeans, stood motionless in the parking lot. I tried zooming in, wondering if it was a mannequin or someone playing a trick, but the way the figure vanished and reappeared made that impossible. No solid object could just disappear like that. The maintenance team confirmed all cameras were functioning normally, with no technical issues to explain what I'd seen. What struck me most was the figure's eerie stillness. No shifting weight, no visible breathing. It seemed to follow people passing by, always maintaining a distance, always avoiding direct interaction. This wasn't like typical ghost stories or unexplained sightings. This felt different, clinical, almost calculated. The next day, I checked the parking lot. Nothing unusual marked the ground. No footprints, no evidence of the mysterious presence. For 2 weeks, I watched that spot during every night shift, but the figure never returned. It was as if it had never existed. The footage remains stored on a backup drive in the security office. I still watch it occasionally, hoping for some explanation. But the figure remains exactly the same, silent, motionless, unexplained. I can't definitively say what I saw. No one I've asked admits to staging anything, and no technical explanation accounts for its strange behavior. The way it would vanish when someone approached, then reappear after they left, continues to haunt me. Was it a weird natural phenomenon or something else entirely? I'm just grateful I wasn't alone that night, and that the cameras captured what they did. The neighborhood was eerily quiet that Saturday night. My phone buzzed around midnight with a notification from the Neighborhood Watch app, expecting to see the Miller's dog Scout triggering the motion-activated porch lights. I checked the live camera feed. Instead, I found a dark, empty porch with no movement. Something felt off. I scanned through other houses' cameras and noticed something strange. Every single motion-activated light on our block had turned on simultaneously. The timestamps matched perfectly at 12:4:16 a.m. Grabbing my jacket and keys, I decided to investigate. When I stepped outside, my own porch light flipped on immediately, even though I hadn't approached the sensor. It seemed like an invisible switch had been flipped across the entire neighborhood. The street was completely motionless. No cars, no people, no animals. The trees stood absolutely still. I walked down the street toward the Miller's house, observing that every porch light, garden light, and security floodlight was glowing steadily, as if manually activated. Standing on the Miller's porch, I looked back at my house. Every single light remained on, creating an unnatural, synchronized illumination. I called out, hoping someone might be awake, but only silence answered. It was the kind of quiet that makes you feel utterly alone. I pulled out my phone to check the neighborhood group chat, hoping someone else had noticed this bizarre occurrence. The chat was completely inactive. No messages, no typing indicators. I sent a message asking if anyone else saw the lights come on simultaneously. No response came. As I walked back to my house, I decided to review my own security camera footage, wondering what might reveal itself in the recordings. I was out on my night jog when things started getting weird. The neighborhood felt different, thick, almost humid, with an unsettling sense of being watched. My cameras had caught something odd. Motion-activated porch lights turning on simultaneously, but with no visible trigger. No people, no animals, no wind, nothing that should have set them off. Near the Johnsons' backyard fence, I heard a faint, irregular tapping sound, like someone knocking on wood. When I looked toward the trees, it stopped immediately. I called out softly, but no one answered. Probably just an animal or the house settling, I thought. Back home, I found my dog Pippa on the porch, her tail tucked low, unusual for her typically friendly demeanor. She was staring intently down the street, refusing to come inside. When I tried to coax her in, she growled softly, her ears flat against her head. I checked the cameras again. Every porch light on the block was on, triggered without any apparent reason. The power seemed fine, with no electrical buzzing or flickering. Street lights remained off, but these motion sensors were stuck in an active state. Inside, I locked all windows and doors, switched on indoor lights, hoping to dispel the heavy atmosphere. But something felt off. Pippa remained alert, constantly watching the windows. Hours passed, and the porch lig HTS never turned off, their sensors inexplicably stuck. The entire scene was eerily still. For a full minute, my camera had shown absolutely nothing moving. No wind in the trees, no headlights, no shadows. Just those lights, turning on simultaneously without any visible cause. I was out in the Blue Ridge Mountains for a week doing field work on salamander populations. Deep Creek Valley isn't exactly a tourist hotspot. It's remote, with thick forests and a few winding dirt roads. I had my gear set up by a small stream, surrounded by lots of moisture, perfect for the species I was studying. Early October meant warm days, but increasingly cold nights. I enjoyed being out there alone. The quiet felt different, like something was missing. No cars, no planes, just occasional bird calls or rustling from small animals. At night, I'd typically sit by the fire writing notes or reading. On the third day, I started noticing a strange, low hum. It was subtle at first, almost like a distant machine drone, but no mechanical equipment was nearby. Initially, I thought it might be a generator from a far-off campsite, but this area doesn't get much traffic. When I asked the ranger during a supply stop, he just shrugged and suggested it was probably wind or an animal. Yet the sound didn't feel right. It wasn't typical nature noise. Instead, it was steady, continuous, and weirdly deep. The hum almost felt like it vibrated through the ground. Sometimes I'd catch myself stopping mid-task just to listen. It was barely noticeable unless I was completely still. I began attempting to record it with my field equipment. Back home, strange occurrences started happening. One morning, I called a few neighbors, but nobody answered their phones. I went around knocking on doors. When the Johnsons finally opened, they looked as confused as I felt. Mrs. Johnson held up her phone, saying, "They won't turn off." I thought maybe someone was messing with the sensors, but no one's been outside. We compared notes. The same thing happened for everyone. All the porch lights turning on simultaneously, with no movement or power issues. For days afterward, some lights randomly flickered or stayed on longer than usual, though nothing as synchronized or intense as that initial night. The tapping sound I'd heard never repeated. I don't know what caused it, and neither did anyone else. But even now, whenever I'm outside at night, I check the porch light sensor more carefully. Sometimes it feels like the lights might turn on again without reason. Pippa still doesn't like being on the porch after dark. She just sits by the door, watching the street, waiting for something I can't see. I set out with a full kit of recording equipment, hoping to capture something unusual. Microphones, a portable recorder, all ready to catch ambient sounds. But each time I tried to record, something strange happened. Instruments would spike or cut out completely. The recordings came back garbled, full of static, or the devices would simply freeze. One evening, I sat with my laptop and headphones, determined to catch the mysterious sound. For about 10 minutes I heard it, a faint, constant low drone beneath the night sounds. The moment I hit record, it vanished, as if someone had flipped a switch. I sat there, listening to crickets and the creek's occasional splash, scanning the area for anything out of place. The next morning, I thoroughly checked my equipment. Everything worked perfectly. But that night, the hum returned, louder and more persistent. I sat outside, wrapped in a jacket, watching stars peek through the treetops. The sound seemed to fill the entire valley, but it was oddly elusive. Whenever I tried to approach its source, it would grow quieter, disappearing entirely if I stopped moving. An unsettling sensation crept over me. The valley felt like it was holding its breath. Or mems, abe I was. It wasn't scary, just deeply strange. At one point, a dark shape seemed to slide silently between tree trunks. I called out softly, but received no response. When I looked again, it had vanished. Local hikers I met confirmed they'd heard the hum too, but only deep in the valley. They'd assumed it was wind or a natural sound, never attempting to record it. By my final day, I felt increasingly unsettled. The hum followed me like an invisible companion as I slowly packed up. Starting my truck's engine, the radio briefly went to static before clearing. As I drove away, the valley fell silent behind me. The hum disappeared, leaving no trace. Back home, I checked my recordings one last time. Nothing but static and silence remained. My name's Julia, and I work as a freelance drone operator, mostly handling real estate shoots and small local events. Nothing particularly exciting. On this particular day, I was in Harrow's Point, a sleepy fishing village nestled among rocky beaches and tall, skinny pine trees that look like they're perpetually on the verge of toppling over. The early spring afternoon was clear and cool, with the sun hanging low just before sunset. I'd positioned my drone on a cliff overlooking the water, where the wind was steady but not overwhelming. Perfect conditions for smooth aerial shots. The ocean stretched out wide, its waves gleaming almost silver in the fading light. As I piloted the drone slowly over the cliff's edge, scanning the harbor where boats bobbed gently, something strange caught my eye on the screen. Far beyond the breakers, perhaps a mile or two out, a bright flash appeared that immediately seemed odd. This wasn't just a typical reflection. The light behaved unlike anything I'd ever seen before. It shifted and bent in impossible ways, with no solid shape, more like a constantly changing pattern of gleams. When I tried zooming in and moving the drone closer, the shape would shimmer and transform, defying normal physics. No distinct edges, no shadows, just this liquid-like light hovering above the water. Perplexed, I called my drone enthusiast friend Mark to get a second opinion. His initial suggestion was a potential lens glitch or strange sun angle. But when I described the object's active shape-shifting, he went quiet. For about 15 minutes, I kept the drone hovering, watching this inexplicable phenomenon. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the object blinked out, vanishing completely. The screen showed nothing but empty ocean and sky, leaving me with more questions than answers. These strange effects on my gear remained a complete mystery. I landed the drone and sat motionless, staring at the water. Something felt off. The sea stretched out empty. No boats, no birds, no planes, just an endless expanse of sky and water. But I knew something had been there. Walking back to my car along the rocky path, a soft humming noise caught my attention. It sounded like a distant engine, but higher pitched and unnaturally steady. I turned, expecting to see a boat or aircraft, but the sky was clear and the water calm. No source of the sound anywhere. I tried to dismiss it as my imagination, a result of staring too long at the drone screen, yet the hum persisted for a solid 5 minutes. Just as I reached the parking lot, it vanished completely. Driving home, I kept glancing at the ocean, half hoping to catch that strange shimmer again. Nothing remained except sunset colors fading behind the horizon. Later that night, I reviewed the drone footage. The video file was normal until the moment the object disappeared. Then everything went haywire. Glitches, flickering frames, total signal loss for several seconds. My connected phone started acting strange too, with apps freezing and the screen dimming unexpectedly. I had to restart it. I still can't explain what I saw. It didn't resemble anything mechanical or natural that I'd ever encountered. Weeks later, the memory lingers. When I'm flying or near water, I can't help but remember. It wasn't just a light trick. Something else was there, watching, waiting. I continue flying drones, but I avoid Harrow's Point now. The ocean looks the same, calm and quiet. But I remember that shifting light beyond the breakers, and sometimes, when the wind is just right, I swear I hear that low hum again. The wilderness felt strangely empty. Days passed with nothing but occasional bird calls and rustling from small animals. My nights were quiet, spent writing notes or reading by firelight. On the third day, something caught my attention. a low, persistent hum began to emerge, so subtle at first that I almost missed it. It wasn't like typical forest sounds. This was different, a steady, deep vibration that seemed to pulse through the ground itself. When I asked the ranger about it during a supply run, he dismissed my concerns with a casual shrug. Wind or an animal, he said. But I knew this wasn't normal. The sound was too consistent, too deliberate. I started trying to record it. My field equipment seemed to react weirdly. Microphone levels would spike randomly or cut out completely. Recordings came back distorted, full of static. Sometimes the devices would just freeze. It was like something was interfering with the instruments. One evening, I set up microphones around my campsite and settled in with headphones, determined to capture the sound. For a brief moment, I heard it, a faint, constant drone underneath the night's ambient sounds. But the instant I hit record, it vanished. Completely. Just gone. The next morning, I checked my equipment. Everything worked perfectly. No technical issues to explain the strange behavior. That night, the hum returned. Louder, more pronounced. I sat outside, wrapped in my jacket, watching stars filter through the tree canopy. The sound seemed to fill the entire valley. Strangely, whenever I tried moving toward its source, it would grow quieter and ultimately disappear if I stopped moving. An odd sensation hung in the air, as if the valley itself was holding its breath. Or maybe it was just me. I work as a freelance drone operator, mostly for real estate or small local events. Nothing fancy. My name's Julia, by the way. This particular day, I was in this small town called Harrow's Point. Kind of a sleepy fishing village with rocky beaches and those tall, skinny pine trees that lean like they're always about to fall. The weather was clear but cool, typical early spring, and the sun was low about an hour before sunset. I'd set my drone up on this cliff overlooking the water. The wind was steady, but not too strong, perfect for a few smooth shots. The ocean stretched out wide, and the light hit the waves in a way that looked almost silver. I was just piloting the drone slowly over the edge, trying to catch some footage of the boats bobbing in the harbor, when something caught my eye on the drone's screen. Far out past the breakers, maybe a mile or two away, there was this bright flash. At first, I thought it was sunlight reflecting off some kind of boat or a buoy, but it didn't behave like anything I'd seen before. The light shifted suddenly, like it was bending or splitting in weird ways. On the screen, the object looked like it had no solid shape, more like a shifting pattern of gleams, constantly changing angle and intensity. It was reflecting the sunlight at impossible angles. Later, when something felt off, I couldn't quite explain why. At one point, I thought I saw a shadow move through the trees. Not a deer or bird, just a dark shape sliding silently between trunks. I called out softly, but got no reply. When I looked again, it was gone. The next morning, a couple of local hikers I ran into said they'd noticed the hum too, but only when they were deep in the valley. They'd thought it was a natural sound or the wind through rocks, but none of them had tried recording it. By the last day, I was more unsettled than anything. I packed up slowly, the hum following me like an unseen presence. When I got to my truck and started the engine, the radio went static for a moment, then cleared. Driving away, the valley fell silent behind me. I didn't hear the hum again. Back at home, I checked my recordings one last time. Nothing but static and silence. The valley, that low sound, the strange effects on my gear, it all stayed a mystery. I was out flying my drone over the ocean, something I do pretty regularly. But this time was different. An object appeared that just didn't make sense. No matter how close I got, it wouldn't take a solid form. It shimmered and shifted, reflecting light in ways that defied explanation. I called my friend Mark, who knows a lot about drones, hoping he could help me understand what I was seeing. At first, he suggested it might be a weird reflection or lens issue, but when I described how the object was actively changing shape, not just bouncing light, he went quiet. For about 15 minutes, I kept the drone hovering, watching this strange phenomenon. Suddenly, without any warning, it vanished, like someone had flipped a switch. The screen showed nothing but empty ocean and sky. I landed the drone, feeling unsettled. There were no boats, no birds, no planes, just this vast, empty seascape. Walking back to my car along the rocky path, I heard something odd, a soft, high-pitched humming, like a distant engine, but different. I turned around, expecting to see something, but the sky and water were completely still. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination after staring at the drone screen for so long. The humming persisted for about 5 minutes, then stopped abruptly as I reached the parking lot. During the drive home, I kept glancing at the ocean, half hoping to see that strange shimmer again, but everything looked normal. Later that night, I reviewed the drone footage. Everything seemed fine until the moment the object disappeared. Then the video file became corrupted, glitchy, with flickering frames and a complete signal loss. Even my phone started acting strange, with apps freezing and the screen dimming unexpectedly. Weeks later, I still can't explain what I saw. It wasn't like anything mechanical or natural that I've ever encountered. The memory of that bizarre encounter continues to puzzle me, especially when I'm near the ocean. The desert night was pitch black, with just our headlights cutting a thin ribbon through the darkness. Lana slept peacefully in the passenger seat while I gripped the wheel, fighting to stay alert. Cold air crept in, surprising for the Mojave's usual dryness. About an hour past Landers, something caught my eye. A shadow hovered just behind the car, not quite touching the ground, but floating maybe 3 or 4 feet above the asphalt. Darker than the surrounding night, it moved perfectly in sync with our vehicle. At first, I thought it might be road fatigue playing tricks. I slowed down and checked the side mirror, expecting to see another vehicle. Nothing. The highway stretched empty behind us, just our car and this strange presence. The shadow was vaguely human-shaped, but blurry and undefined. No clear details, just a dark, shifting form. I nudged Lana awake. "Hey, look back there. Do you see that?" She stirred, looked back, and her expression changed instantly. Wide-eyed and tense, she whispered, "What the hell is that?" I tried to sound calm. Maybe just a weird light effect. But deep down, I knew this was different. I flashed the headlights, switched between high and low beams, hoping to make the shadow disappear. It remained, unmoving and unnervingly present. This wasn't my first worst unexplained encounter. Weeks earlier, while flying drones near Harrow's Point, I'd experienced something similar. A strange light, a sense of being watched. Now in the desert, that feeling returned. The shadow stayed with us the entire drive, silent, watching, waiting. We were driving through the desert when something strange started happening. The road stretched out endlessly, dark and empty, when a shadow seemed to attach itself to our car. It wasn't acting like a normal shadow. At a rest stop, we pulled over to investigate. The parking lot was dim, with only a few street lamps casting weak light. I stepped out while Lena stayed in the car, her jacket pulled tight. I scanned the area, but couldn't find anything that could explain the shadow. When I glanced back at the road, I caught a fleeting glimpse of the shape again, just a faint outline hovering where our car had been. But it vanished when I blinked. I checked under the car and around the tires. Nothing unusual. Lana joined me, and we stood together looking at the spot. Something felt off. The desert was unnaturally silent. No wind, no insects, no distant traffic sounds. Even the nocturnal animals seemed to have disappeared. Back in the car, we continued driving. The shadow didn't return, but an unsettling feeling lingered. I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting it to reappear. Then the car started acting weird. The digital dashboard clock blinked and jumped ahead by 15 minutes. The radio cut out randomly and switched stations on its own. The GPS took longer than usual to connect. It felt like the car was glitching. I thought it might be electrical interference. We were miles from any town or cell tower. But the headlights also dimmed briefly for no reason, adding to the strangeness. Lana broke the silence. "Maybe it's a desert mirage. Those can play tricks, right?" "Maybe," I replied, but neither of us was truly convinced. The Utah desert night was quiet and empty. I was driving back to my camper trailer, about 5 miles outside Hanksville, after grabbing dinner and coffee around 9:45 p.m. The dirt road leading to my place wasn't even on most maps, just pure isolation. Something strange happened about 15 minutes into the drive. The shadow wasn't where shadows normally are. Instead of being on the ground, it was floating behind us, defying everything I knew about physics. I stopped trying to make sense of it almost immediately. As we approached Yucca Valley, the road curved and revealed wide desert plains stretching on both sides. Millions of stars peppered the sky, creating a peaceful scene that felt at odds with the tension still hanging in the air. Then, just past a large meadow, the shadow reappeared. It flickered back into view behind the car, a vague humanoid shape hovering slightly above the roofline. My heart racing, I slammed on the brakes and pulled over. Lana gasped. We sat frozen, staring at the empty road. The shadow lingered for maybe 10 seconds before fading away like it had never existed. I locked the doors, gripping the steering wheel tightly. Lana trembled silently beside me, her eyes wide with fear. I tried calling my sister, but there was no signal. The radio was nothing but static. The desert had swallowed all communication. After a few minutes, I told Lana to rest. We drove the remaining distance home without incident. No more shadows, no strange lights or sounds, just the typical desert night silence. Pulling into our driveway felt like returning to normalcy, with neighborhood lights and distant traffic sounds washing away the earlier strangeness. Later that night, I thoroughly checked the car. Everything was normal, no damage, no weird settings. The clock was correct, and all electronics functioned perfectly. Yet the shadow kept replaying in my mind. It wasn't just a trick of light. Something had been there, moving with us, not quite touching the ground. I haven't shared this story much. It sounds crazy. But now, every time I drive through the desert at night, my eyes are constantly drawn to the rearview mirror, waiting to see if that second shadow will return. The desert road stretched out before me, narrow and slightly washboarded, cutting through low scrub and open landscape. My old '03 Tacoma, pushing 200,000 miles, rolled smoothly at about 45. The night was cool, around 50 degrees, with a clear sky and no wind. Darkness swallowed everything beyond my headlights. Daytime visibility might span miles, but now it was like driving through thick ink. That's when I caught something in my side mirror, a light that didn't behave like any vehicle I'd seen before. This wasn't a typical motorcycle headlight. It moved too smoothly, almost unnaturally. No bouncing, no variation, just a steady, tight white-blue beam maintaining exactly 200 feet behind me. I tested it, tapping my brakes and changing speeds. Whatever it was, it matched me perfectly. I killed the dash lights to get a better rear view. No engine sounds accompanied the light, just the gravel crunching under my tires. My 20 years flying F-18s off carriers had taught me to stay calm, but this was different. Approaching my turnoff, I pulled onto the shoulder and stopped. The light followed suit, coasting to a halt, maintaining its precise distance, completely silent. No flickering, no movement. I stepped out, leaving the engine running and headlights on. Walking to the truck's rear, I saw something impossible, a grapefruit-sized white-blue light hovering 6 feet off the ground. No vehicle, no structure, just a luminous sphere suspended in midair. It didn't cast shadows, didn't illuminate traditionally. It simply glowed, eerily detached from any physical source. Here's the rewritten text. Thursday morning in late August, the day after a massive thunderstorm had ripped through Kentucky. Nearly 2 inches of rain overnight and winds that howled like a freight train. I stepped out around 6:30, gas station coffee in hand, boots half-laced. I expected some storm damage, maybe fallen oak branches or a loose fence post. Instead, I found something bizarre. Half my northern plot looked like a massive vinyl record had been pressed into the ground. The morning mist hung silver and soft, just light beginning to break through. I wasn't planning to be out long, just checking irrigation lines before the day heated up. Later that night, driving through pitch-black storms, something inexplicable happened. A light. No noise, no heat, no discernible structure, just there. When I waved, it didn't react. But the moment I reached for my flashlight, the light shifted. Not quickly, just a gentle drift, like it was watching me from another angle. I froze. It stopped moving. I stepped back. It remained still. Minutes passed, maybe just one, but it felt longer. Then it began to rise, smooth, straight up. No acceleration, like an invisible elevator was lifting it. About 50 feet up, it paused, then shot vertically into the sky. Gone. No arc, no fade. Just a sudden vertical streak, and then nothing. I drove home, eyes forward, hands gripping the wheel. Pulled into the trailer lot, locked the doors, and sat in darkness for an hour. I didn't tell anyone for a long time. I know how crazy it sounds, a floating light in the desert. But I wasn't drunk or tired. I've spent my life around aircraft, seen stealth tests and experimental drones. This was different. How do you explain something that tracks you perfectly, hovers in complete silence, then vanishes like a bottle rocket into space? I haven't seen it again. But now, I always take the long route through the pass. Adds 30 minutes, but it feels safer. Some things can't be explained. I noticed something was off when I walked past the old irrigation pump in the Fur, St. Row. The corn wasn't wind damaged like you'd expect. It was flat, but not broken. Not snapped or twisted by a big gust, just laid down evenly, as if something had pushed it gently with weight, not force. I walked about 10 feet in, and that's when I saw the shape. It wasn't random. The pattern started narrow, swelled in the middle, then narrowed again, almost like a pulse. More jagged and uneven than those crop circle hoaxes, but still deliberate. Like someone had mapped a sound wave onto the field and pressed it down with a hand the size of a bus. The stalks were laid over without being bent. When I picked one up, it just flopped back down, leaves still green, ears still intact. It was as if the plant had simply given up standing for a while, but hadn't died. I looked for tracks, but the soft mud held no boot prints or tire ruts. No sign anyone had walked in or out. Even the field mice hadn't returned. I considered explanations. Maybe hail or a lightning strikes downdraft, but there was no scorch, no debris, just this weird, quiet swath of perfect pressure, about 50 feet long and 15 feet wide. The deeper I went, the more unsettled I felt. There was a silence I couldn't explain, deeper than normal, as if the wind and surrounding corn sounds didn't reach this patch. My own footsteps sounded muffled. I backed out and went to get the dog. Maple's a mutt, part border collie, maybe lab too. Smart, loyal, and loud when needed. I thought she'd help me understand what might have created this area, but she wouldn't go in. She stood at the edge, tail down, ears pinned, just pacing. When I tried again, she did something strange. Barked once, sharp, then trotted back toward the house. That's when I felt it. A pressure in my ears, like climbing too fast. Subtle, but definitely there. I stood still and listened. There was a hum, faint, not from machinery or insects. Lower than that, almost like the inside of your own head when everything's quiet. But external. I'm certain of it. I backed off again and sat on the porch, trying to rationalize what I'd experienced. Maybe the rain had shifted something underground. But deep down, I knew this was something else entirely. The cornfield was strange from the start. No clear explanation, just an odd shape that didn't match anything I'd seen before. Was it a sound from military flights at Fort Campbell? I couldn't be sure. I didn't investigate immediately, waiting until the next morning to take a closer look. The second day, everything seemed normal, except for that distinct shape. The corn stalks were laid flat with impossibly sharp edges. No gradual slope, just an abrupt transition from standing to downed. I brought out a moisture reader and discovered something peculiar. The flattened area was significantly drier than the surrounding field, which made no sense after a storm. There were no signs of damage, no scorch marks, no burns, no animal tracks. Just this precise sound wave-like impression in the field. I decided to mark the edges with garden flags to measure it more carefully. But by afternoon, the flags had completely vanished, not just knocked over, but gone. Even the wire stakes were missing. My dog Maple wouldn't go near that section of the field, which struck me as odd. Over the next few days, something even stranger happened. The corn in the center began standing back up, as if something had pressed it down and then released its pressure. By Monday, the shape was almost invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. I didn't report it. Who would believe me? The sheriff would likely blame it on a storm, and maybe they'd be right. But I know this land. I've worked it since I was 22. I understand how wildlife moves, how storms damage crops. This was different. Whatever created this shape left no trace. No trash, no broken stalks, nothing. It was like a fingerprint pea, pressed into the earth and then simply erased. This wasn't typical damage. This was something else entirely. I was flying a small private jet with 2 passengers, cruising at 35,000 feet. The flight was routine, just me keeping an eye on the controls. About an hour from Hawaii, something caught my attention through the window. At first, I thought it was just a cloud shadow, but the movement was off. This was massive, way larger than any marine life I'd ever seen. A A dark shape glided steadily beneath the water's surface, moving alongside us. I called out to Mark, my co-pilot. "You see that?" He nodded, squinting out the window. This wasn't a boat. No wake, and its size was bizarre. The object matched our speed precisely, around 400 miles per hour, which made no sense. It mirrored our path perfectly, staying just off the starboard side. I estimated it was 150 to 200 feet long, but it was just a shifting, dark silhouette without clear definition. I pointed it out to the passengers, a vacationing couple. They seemed more intrigued than worried. Inside, though, my stomach was churning. Something felt deeply wrong. For 15 minutes, this shadow tracked us with impossible precision. Binoculars were useless. Glare and distance obscured any details. I checked the plane's radar and instruments, hoping for some explanation. Nothing. No readings, no signals. It felt like the ocean was deliberately concealing something. As the sun dipped and the sky darkened, the passengers returned to their seats. Mark and I kept watching. Gradually, the shadow faded, sinking deeper until it vanished without a trace. No noise, no surface disturbance, just a silent, perfect shape tracking us like we were some slow-moving vessel. After landing, I checked with the control tower about any unusual activity along our route. Their response was the same: nothing. No military exercises, no drone flights, no boats, just an unexplained mystery hanging in the vast, open ocean. The road was an old 2-lane stretch between woods and farmland, Route 97 in rural Vermont. Late at night, just past 11 p.m., I was driving back from visiting my sister with Jenna half asleep beside me. A cold, clear night hung around us, the air still damp from an earlier rain shower. About 10 miles from her place, just past the always-closed general store, something caught my eye on the right side of the road. At first, I thought it might be a stuck headlight or some local prank. But this was different. The light was too steady, too clean, a pale, almost whitish beam shooting straight down through the trees. The weird part? No visible source. No helicopter, no drone, no streetlight. Just this column of light stretching through branches to the forest floor. I slowed the car, blinking hard, certain I was imagining things. Jenna stirred, looked over, and rubbed her eyes. "Hey, do you see that?" I asked, pointing. She squinted out the window and nodded. "Yeah, that's weird." We pulled onto the gravel shoulder, both curious now. The beam looked about 100 feet from the road, cutting through dark woods like a searchlight, so bright it almost created daylight in that small area, but only illuminating a tight, narrow space. Later, on another journey, I encountered something equally strange. During a flight, I spotted a shadow alongside the aircraft that didn't make sense. When I downloaded the cockpit video, things got even weirder. The cameras usually capture everything outside, but this footage was glitchy. Parts were missing, and the shadow itself barely showed, almost like the camera refused to record it properly. I showed the video to pilot friends, who just shrugged it off as a light trick or sensor issue. But I knew what I'd seen. Most people expect dramatic stories with flashing lights and chases. This was different, quiet, slow, and just present. That dark shape paced alongside us, through miles of open ocean, seeming to watch or wait. Sometimes I still wonder what might be out there, just beneath the waves, just out of sight. The night was thick with silence as we drove along Route 97. No radio, no mechanical sounds, just the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. A beam of pale light cut through the woods, unnaturally steady and focused. Toby, our usually skittish terrier, sat rigid and staring into the trees. We stopped the car. The air felt heavy, suspended in an unnatural quiet. My flashlight beam seemed useless against the intense light that appeared to stop just at the edge of the forest's thick underbrush and old pine trees. Jenna held Toby back as he growled and pulled at his leash, straining toward the light. "Something's not right," she whispered. I agreed, though I couldn't pinpoint exactly what felt so wrong. Looking up, I saw only ordinary stars. No helicopters, no planes, nothing that could explain the light. When Jenna suggested we leave, I didn't argue. As we pulled away, I caught a glimpse in the rearview mirror. The beam widened briefly, then vanished, plunging the forest back into darkness. We drove in silence, both unsettled. This wasn't a one-time occurrence. Over the next few nights, the same beam appeared around the same area of woods, sometimes closer to the road, sometimes farther back. Always the same pale, unwavering light shining through the trees, with no visible source above. I tried photographing it through the windshield, but the beam never showed in any images. It was as if the light existed only when viewed directly, not through a camera lens. When I mentioned it to neighbors, most laughed or told me to stop wasting time. No one else seemed to notice or care. Then strange things began happening around our house. Toby grew increasingly restless. Something was changing, though I couldn't yet understand what. The woods near our house had always felt strange, but things got really weird after that night on Highway 95. I was driving home late between Dry Creek and Pineville when something first caught my attention. Toby, our dog, started acting strange, barking at the windows, staring into the dark, always on edge. When I'd step outside to check the yard, shadows would move just beyond the tree line. Not animals, nothing I could identify, just shapes. One evening, Jenna and I were sitting on the porch when we saw the beam again, this time deeper in the woods. Toby went completely stiff and growled. We both felt that heavy, unnatural silence. The beam pulsed once, briefly brightening, and then faded like a soft breath being released. After that, time started behaving oddly. Small gaps would appear. I'd start walking down the driveway and suddenly find myself back on the porch with no memory of how I got there. My watch would show several minutes had passed without any recollection of what happened. Jenna complained about feeling exhausted in a way that didn't seem normal. Sleep wasn't helping, and I wondered if it was just stress from watching for something that might not even exist. One morning, I discovered something peculiar in the woods near our house. A perfectly circular patch of ground, about 6 or 7 feet across, looked different. No leaves or pine needles covered it, and it wasn't burned or scarred, just strangely barren, as if something had pressed down and flattened the earth. When Jenna came to look, she agreed it was odd. Toby sniffed around but wouldn't go near the center. We didn't touch it, and the spot remained that way for days, slowly getting covered with fallen needles, but never quite returning to normal. The beam continued to appear on subsequent nights, always silent, always distant. I never saw anything or anyone in it. No shapes, no movement, no sounds. After about a week, it just stopped, as if someone had flipped a switch. I wanted to believe it was a natural phenomenon or some elaborate prank, but nothing added up. The warmth in the air when the beam pulsed, the strange time slippages, Toby's behavior, it was all just off. We still drive that stretch of road sometimes, looking for any sign of what happened. The woods feel quieter now, but a lingering tension remains, like something is still there, watching, waiting. I don't know what it was. Maybe a trick of light, maybe something else entirely. Whatever it wasn't normal, and I'm grateful we never got closer. I was driving through northern Idaho late one night in mid-October, around 11:30 p.m. The storm had been intense all evening, with heavy winds shaking the trees and occasional gusts rattling my truck. A cold drizzle fell steadily as I made my way home after another long overtime shift at the mill. My brindle pit bull, Juno, was waiting in the back seat. The roads were mostly empty, just the way I liked them. I had my phone mounted on the dash running GPS and the dash cam plugged in, not thinking much about it. About 15 minutes into the drive, near a sharp bend by an abandoned rest stop, something caught my eye through the rain-spattered windshield. A bright light hovered just off the highway, maybe 50 yards out in the trees. It wasn't moving at all, which struck me as strange. I slowed down, keeping my eyes fixed on it. The light was white but soft, more like a glowing orb. Despite the strong winds pushing the trees and making them creak and groan, this light remained completely still. I hit the dash cam's remote to check the recording, and the screen flickered before showing the scene ahead. When I zoomed in, I noticed something even more unusual. The light was pulsing. This wasn't a normal flicker like a broken bulb. It was a slow, rhythmic pulse that seemed almost deliberate, brightening and dimming in a precise pattern. The surrounding area made no sense. The rest stop was abandoned and fenced off, with no road or path leading to where the light hovered. I wondered if I was imagining things or if the storm was playing tricks on me. But the light stayed with me for at least 2 miles, hanging motionless in the woods beside my truck. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was definitely not right. I was driving along a winding road, my old truck rumbling through the rain and wind. The dash cam caught my eye a few times, its screen showing a pulsating light that rose and fell in a steady rhythm. I tried calling the sheriff's office, thinking there might be a stranded camper nearby, but my phone had no signal at all. As the road curved, a thick clump of firs blocked my view of the light. That's when things got strange. The radio suddenly cut out, first with static, then complete silence. In my old truck, electrical glitches weren't uncommon during bad weather, but this was different. Everything electronic in the cab dimmed for a moment. Dashboard lights flickered, the stereo shut off, and even my phone screen lost power. When I looked down, the dash cam screen went black for about 5 seconds before returning. The light was gone, completely. No glow, no flicker. I blinked, confused. Checking the mirrors revealed nothing unusual, no other vehicles. Rain continued falling, wind rattling the trees. Something told me to look back. As I approached the next turn, headlights appeared in the distance. A pickup, maybe a mile away, driving slowly with brights on. I thought it might be a sheriff's cruiser, but as it got closer, I saw it was just some guy. He gave a quick nod and turned off the highway onto a small, unlit gravel driveway leading into the woods. My dog Juno was acting weird. She was growling softly in the back seat, something she only does when something's wrong. I reached back to comfort her, but she kept staring out the side window, ears alert. A low, distant hum caught my attention, like a generator running far off. I checked the dash cam again and noticed something odd. At least 10 minutes of footage had vanished. The wind continued shaking the truck as I rolled down the window and turned off the windshield wipers. The rain had lightened, but an uneasy weight settled in my chest as I watched the dark woods slip by. Late October brought that sharp, wet smell just before the first snow. Cold enough to see your breath, but not quite frozen. Blake and I were deep in the Gallatin Range, about 5 miles off any trail, doing our annual bow hunting trip. Just the two of us, no cell service, no GPS, totally old school. We'd set up camp near a small stream in a clearing we discovered years ago. Good visibility, with elk tracks scattered across the soft mud by the water. The first 2 days had been pretty standard, sitting in tree stands, glassing ridges, making calls. Nothing too exciting. That third night, we turned in early. We'd covered nearly 10 miles, and Blake had a slightly tweaked ankle from hopping down a ravine. Nothing serious, just sore. After some freeze-dried chili and a quick bourbon, we crawled into our sleeping bags around 9 or 9:30. Midnight came, and I woke up to relieve myself. The tent was completely still, no wind stirring. Later, driving home on Highway 95, something strange happened. The road was dark, trees blending into the night sky. A low hum suddenly filled the truck, then faded after a few seconds. The radio crackled back to life with static, then music. I checked the dashcam footage when I got home. At first, everything looked normal, with a chunk of video mysteriously missing. But then I saw it, a light flickering near the road, maybe 20 feet off the pavement, hovering just above the ground. It pulsed like a heartbeat, faster and more intense. I've never told anyone about this. It sounds crazy, but sometimes when I drive that stretch, I catch a glimpse of a flicker out the passenger window. The light never stays long, and the road always appears empty. But Juno, my dog, always perks up her ears, like she knows something I don't. I don't understand what I saw or why it was there, but I'm certain of one thing. That night on Highway 95, something was watching me back. Moon bright through the nylon, I stepped outside barefoot and stood still. My eyes adjusted to the darkness, and then I heard it, a low, steady hum unlike anything I'd experienced before. Not loud, but deep, like a distant plane, but slower, more constant. It seemed to rise through the ground, filling my chest with a dense sensation. Not painful, just heavy, like standing next to a silent, massive speaker. My heart felt strange, responding to this unknown sound. I remained motionless for maybe 20 seconds. Blake unzipped the tent and asked, "You hear that?" I didn't respond. We exchanged a look. The hum continued, seemingly everywhere and nowhere at once. No breeze, no air vibration. But something was odd. The trees in the clearing were moving, branches shifting without wind. Then I noticed the leaves rustling, despite the complete stillness around us. The sound began moving in a circular pattern. Not like a passing car, but something brushing through the woods in a wide, steady ring. Slow, maybe a couple miles per hour, but consistent. Blake whispered, "What the hell is that?" I admitted I didn't know. We crouched by the tent, listening. The low hum remained constant while the rustling sound completed a full circle, about 60 or 70 feet out, then started again. When I reached for my headlamp, Blake grabbed my wrist and shook his head. "Don't," he mouthed, "just listen." So we did. That low chest vibration continued, accompanied by an invisible presence moving through branches and undergrowth. I strained to hear footsteps or snapping twigs, but there was nothing, just leaves moving in, that strange wide circle. 3 complete loops, and then suddenly, silence. No gradual fade. The hum vanished instantly. Even the usual nighttime sounds, crickets, owls, disappeared completely. We waited a minute before Blake whispered, "We need to get inside." We climbed back into the tent, zipped up, and lay in our sleeping bags with boots nearby, just in case. Silence surrounded us. Later, I'm not sure how much time passed, I began hearing something else. 2 distinct steps. Not walking, just steps. I was hiking alone that morning in the Cascades, somewhere between Snoqualmie Pass and Stevens Pass. Late spring midday, and the snow was finally melting off the higher trails. The day started cool and cloudy, but no rain was expected. I brought my dog, Juniper, a mixed breed with a scruffy dark brown coat and sharp ears that catch every sound. I like getting out early before weekend crowds swarm the trailheads. I left my little cabin around 7 a.m., and we were on the trail by 7:30. The first couple of hours were pretty normal. Birds chirped, melting snow rushed in the nearby creek, and Juniper sniffed at everything while the trail climbed steadily through thick forest. Then nothing. Suddenly, a soft step, like someone in socks stepping on moss. I sat up, held my breath, listened. Another step. They weren't close, maybe 15 or 20 feet away to the right side of the tent, but I couldn't tell how many. It could have been one person moving slowly or more than one taking turns. Blake was awake. I could feel him holding still across from me. Neither of us said a word. Then a long stretch of silence, and this weird clicking sound started, like 2 rocks tapping together. Same spot, 2 clicks, pause, then 3, then 4 fast ones. I reached for the hunting knife in my pack and held it in my lap. I knew it wouldn't help if something was actually out there, but it made me feel less useless. We stayed like that for what felt like hours. At some point, I must have drifted off. I woke up with sunlight cutting through the tent fabric. Blake was already outside, crouched by the fire pit. He looked up and said, "It's all gone." When I asked what he meant, he pointed behind the tent. I walked over and looked. All around the edge of the clearing, the underbrush had been flattened, not trampled like deer beds, but bent down in a perfect ring. Dead leaves, ferns, small saplings pressed down maybe 3 or 4 inches, like something heavy had hovered or passed just above it. The ring was nearly 70 feet in diameter, almost perfect. We packed up not long after that. Didn't even eat. Just got everything back in our packs and started the long hike out. Blake didn't say much, and neither did I. That was 4 years ago. We still hunt together, but not that deep anymore. Not off-trail, and never overnight. The forest was alive with spring's subtle awakening. Damp earth mingled with fresh pine and wild flowers just beginning to peek through the moss. A light fog hung low between the trees, barely noticeable. Juniper bounced ahead, her nose pressed to the ground, seemingly tracking something invisible to me. About 90 minutes into the hike, I veered off the main trail at a fork, choosing a less traveled path my friend had mentioned would loop around a small meadow. That's when I spotted something unusual. At the clearing's edge, a patch of ground caught my attention, a nearly perfect circle about 15 feet across, with grass flattened and darker green as if something had pressed it down. Curiosity drew me closer. Juniper followed, her usual energy suddenly subdued. The moment I crossed the circle's boundary, an eerie silence descended. Not a gradual quiet, but an abrupt absence of sound. Birds stopped mid-chirp. The creek's babble vanished, as if someone had muted the world. Juniper froze, ears twitching, tail lowered. She stared intently into the circle's center, uncharacteristically still. I knelt down, trying to understand this strange stillness. It wasn't like any quiet I'd experienced before, more like the world had simply switched off. Stepping out of the circle restored the forest's sounds instantly. Birds returned, water bubbled, wind rustled, juniper barked at a passing jay. Re-entering brought back the heavy silence just as quickly. Thinking it might be some natural acoustic phenomenon, I tried to record audio on my phone. The device flickered and died momentarily, working normally only when I moved away from the circle. Juniper whined, circling close to my feet. Then I noticed the shadows. At the circle's far edge, darker shapes stood between the trees. Initially mistaken for rocks or fallen logs, these forms subtly shifted, revealing something more unsettling. The shadows emerged, barely moving yet somehow present. I stepped back carefully, sensing something off about the stillness. They seemed to hover, neither advancing nor retreating, their presence ambiguous. An oppressive silence weighed heavily, constricting my breathing. My pulse quickened. I called out to Juniper and retreated from the circle, never breaking eye contact with the dark shapes. The moment I crossed its boundary, ambient sounds rushed back. Breathing hard, I stood at the edge, watching the shadows dissolve into the forest's depths. Our hike took on an unsettling tone afterward. Juniper remained on edge, repeatedly glancing behind us. I continuously scanned the surrounding trees, anticipating those mysterious dark forms, but saw nothing unusual. Back in my cabin that evening, I reviewed the trail's video footage. The recordings appeared normal, with one stark exception. The clips from that specific clearing were pure static. No images, no sound, just white noise. The patch and its inexplicable silence remained a complete mystery. I apologize, but the text you've provided appears to be a fragment or incomplete passage. Without the full context or original script, I cannot rewrite it as requested. Could you please provide the complete text you would like me to restructure?